At exactly 7:12 p.m., the woman they thought was dead unlocked the front door. Rain lashed against the glass walls of the modern lake house, a home built from her sacrifices. Inside, laughter and music echoed from a dinner party. The front door clicked, slowly, quietly. No one heard. Not yet. 6 months earlier, Martha Hale stood on the porch, holding a cold cup of coffee, watching the movers load furniture onto the truck. Each item was a fragment of memory. The leather armchair where her husband had read the Sunday paper. The antique desk lamp she'd bought in Paris in 1998. Yellowed books stacked in damp cardboard boxes. 42 years. This house had been everything for 42 years. "Mom, come inside. It's cold out here." Daniel, her son, 40 years old, wearing a crisp gray suit, stood beside his new BMW. His wife, Clara, sat inside scrolling through her phone. A 32-year-old woman with glossy blonde hair, crimson nails, and a smile that never reached her eyes. Martha didn't answer. She took a sip of bitter coffee. "Mom, are you listening?" Daniel stepped onto the porch, placing a hand on her shoulder. A familiar gesture, the gesture of a dutiful son. But his eyes, always his eyes, never met hers. They slid past, as if looking at a painting on the wall. "I heard you, Daniel. It's just temporary, Mom. Once we sell the old place, you'll get your share. You'll love the new house. By the lake, fresh air, beautiful view." "You've said that 3 times now." Daniel fell silent. Then he smiled. A thin, forced smile. "Are you worried?" "Don't be. I'll take care of everything." Clara tapped the horn lightly. Once, enough to cut the conversation short. Daniel turned back, waved to his wife, then looked at Martha. "Get in the car, Mom. We still need to go to the notary's office." Martha set her coffee cup on the railing, saying nothing. She descended the steps, each one like walking down into a bottomless well. The notary's office was small, smelling of paper and printer ink. Harriet Novak, Martha's old friend, sat across from her, wearing gold-rimmed glasses, her face solemn. "Martha, are you sure about this?" Martha nodded. She had signed 5 documents. The last one was the deed transfer for the house on Elm Street, the house she and her husband had bought in 1983, paid off over 20 years, raised their son in, planted roses in the garden, celebrated Christmases, birthdays, every golden autumn. "I'm sure," Martha said, her voice flat. Clara sat beside Daniel, one hand on the table, fingers tapping lightly. 1 beat, 2 beats, 3 beats. "Thank you so much, Mom," Clara said, her voice sweet as honey. "We'll never forget this." Martha looked straight into Clara's eyes. 2 seconds. Then she smiled. A thin, dry smile. "You're welcome, Clara." Harriet pushed the final document across the desk. "One more signature here and we're done." Martha picked up the pen. Blue ink. Her signature. M.E. Hale. Slanted. Elegant. As it had always been. Done. Daniel exhaled with relief, stood up, and shook Harriet's hand. "Thank you, Harriet. Everything's all set now." Harriet didn't look at him. She looked at Martha. Martha stood up, said nothing, looked at no one, and walked out. When the door closed, Harriet removed her glasses and wiped away tears no one else could see. The lake house was large, modern, all glass and stainless steel. Everything was new. Everything was cold. Martha stood in the living room, looking out at the lake. The water was flat, reflecting the gray sky. No bird song, no wind, only silence. "Which room do you like, Mom?" Clara asked cheerfully, but didn't wait for an answer. "The one at the end of the hall, okay? That one has the best view." The room at the end of the hall. The farthest? The smallest? Martha nodded. Thank you. Clara smiled, then turned to Daniel. Honey, where should we hang this painting? Daniel was scrolling through his phone, not looking up. You decide. You're better at this stuff than I am. Clara giggled, then stepped out onto the balcony, talking on the phone with someone. Laughter echoed. Martha went upstairs, entered the room at the end of the hall. A small room, single bed, one window overlooking the lake, but obscured by an old tree. She sat on the bed, placed her hands on her lap, and looked outside. And she didn't cry. Dinner was served on a long walnut table, a table Martha had chosen, paid for, but the invoice bore Clara's name. Daniel sat at the head, Clara on his right, Martha at the far end, the farthest away. Wine, Mom? Clara asked, lifting the bottle. No, thank you. Clara poured for Daniel, then for herself. 2 glasses, no third. My friend stopped by today, Clara said. Mr. Tran, you remember him, right? He works at the bank. Daniel nodded, chewing his steak. He asked about the house papers? Yes. He said everything's done. The title's been transferred to us. Martha stopped cutting her meat. She looked up. Us? Clara smiled. I'm sorry? You said the title was transferred to us. What do you mean? Clara set down her knife and fork, dabbing her mouth with a napkin. I mean, Daniel and me. Of course. You don't think? Is my name on the papers? Silence. Daniel set down his wineglass. Mom, don't worry. Everything's legal. Harriet handled all the proper procedures. I'm asking, is my name on the papers for this house? Clara sighed. Mom, did you read the documents carefully? They clearly state the buyers are Daniel and Clara Hale. You gave us the money, you didn't co-invest. Martha looked at her son. Daniel didn't look back. Son, she said, her voice very soft. Did you read the papers? I did, Mom. Did you see my signature? Yes. Are you sure? Daniel looked up, his eyes meeting his mother's for the first time. I'm sure. Martha stood up, slowly, unhurried. She folded her napkin and placed it on the table. I want to see the papers. Clara laughed lightly. You don't trust me, Mom? What do you think I did? Martha didn't answer. She just stood there, looking down at Clara. And Clara, for the first time, couldn't smile anymore. That evening, Martha waited for Daniel to come home. He arrived at 8 p.m., exhausted, removing his suit jacket, collapsing onto the sofa. I need to talk to you. Daniel looked up, surprised. Martha stood before him, holding the folder. This signature, she said, her voice calm, isn't mine. Daniel looked at the folder. His face went pale. What are you saying? My signature on the transfer deed. It's not real. It was forged. Daniel stood up. Are you accusing me? No, I'm accusing your wife. Clara emerged from the kitchen, holding a glass of wine, smiling. What did you say about me, Mom? Martha turned, looking straight at Clara. You forged my signature. Clara set down her wineglass, slowly. You forged my signature. Prove it, Clara hissed. I will, Martha said. In court. I'm not confused. Martha said it like a knife cutting through air. I know what I signed, and I know I didn't sign this. Clara looked at Martha, unblinking. So what do you think I did? Stole your house? Tricked Daniel? I'm the villain and you're the saint? Is that it? Martha didn't answer. Clara laughed. A cold, thin laugh. You know what, Mom? You can't lose what was never truly yours in the first place. She turned to Daniel. Tell your mother. Tell her we did everything legally. Tell her she's just confused. Daniel stood between the two women, his face ashen. Mom, he said, his voice trembling. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you need to rest. Martha looked at her son for a long moment. Then she nodded. All right, I'll rest. She walked upstairs, into her room, and closed the door. And that night, as rain began to fall, Martha Hale sat on her bed, looking out at the lake, and didn't cry. But inside her mind, a plan began to form. 3 days later, Martha woke at 2 a.m. Thunder, rain pouring down. She heard voices raised downstairs. She went down, barefoot, without turning on the lights. Daniel and Clara were arguing. You can't do this. Don't you understand? Your mother will ruin everything. She'll sue. She'll drag us down. My mother isn't like that. You don't know what your mother is like, Daniel. You only see what you want to see. Silence. Then Clara's voice, cold and hard. Your mother has to go, right now. What are you saying? Your mother has to leave this house. Tonight. Are you insane? No, you're insane if you let her stay. Do you know what she's been doing? She's contacted lawyers. She's asking about property rights. She's planning something, Daniel. Martha stood still on the stairs, hearing every word. Daniel exhaled, long and deep. What do you want me to do? Throw her out. Now. It's raining. Do you care? Long silence. Then Martha heard footsteps coming up the stairs. She stepped back, but it was too late. Daniel stood before her, his face pale in the hallway light. Mom, he said, you have to go. Martha said nothing, just looked at him. Just temporarily, Mom, until things calm down. Martha still said nothing. Daniel couldn't look into his mother's eyes anymore. Go pack your things. 15 minutes later, Martha stood outside the door, in the rain, holding a small suitcase. Daniel stood inside, hand on the doorknob. Clara stood behind him, arms crossed, looking at Martha with cold eyes. Mom, Daniel said, his voice shaking. I'll call you. I'll sort everything out. Martha looked at her son, then at Clara, and for the first time, Martha Hale smiled. A cold smile, without any emotion. You can't lose what was never truly yours, Clara. Her voice was soft, but each word was like ice-piercing skin. Can you? Clara didn't answer. Her face went pale. Martha turned her back, walked into the rain. Daniel closed the door. The sound of the lock echoed like a verdict. And Martha Hale, 62 years old, stood in the rain, soaked through, suitcase in hand, looking back at the house she had built, paid for, sacrificed for, and she didn't cry. Her eyes cold, clear, calculating, closed slowly. Then she turned away and disappeared into the night. People often think silence is a sign of weakness. They're wrong. Silence is when you stop explaining, stop begging, stop hoping others will understand, and start acting. The room smelled of mildew and old wood. Martha Hale sat on the edge of a narrow bed, her suitcase still packed beside her. Through a small window, she could see the lake, the same lake that bordered the house she'd been cast out of. But from here, it looked different, darker, colder. The landlady, Mrs. Chen, a 70-year-old woman with sharp eyes and a kind smile, knocked on the door. Tea? Martha looked up. Thank you. Mrs. Chen set down a tray, a chipped teapot, 2 cups, no sugar. You don't talk much, Mrs. Chen said, pouring tea. I like that. Too many people talk, not enough people think. Martha wrapped her hands around the warm cup. How much is the rent? $400 a month, cash, no questions. Martha nodded. I'll take it. Mrs. Chen studied her. The expensive wool coat now rain-soaked, the designer handbag worn at the edges, the quiet dignity in her posture. You running from something? No. Running toward something? Martha looked out the window at the lake. Not yet. Mrs. Chen smiled, showing a gold tooth. Good. That's the best answer I've heard in 20 years. She stood up, paused at the door. The people across the lake, the ones in that glass house, they throw parties every weekend. Loud music, expensive cars. You can see everything from here. Martha didn't respond. Mrs. Chen closed the door softly behind her. And Martha Hale sat alone, drinking cold tea, watching the house that had once been hers glow like a beacon in the distance. For 3 weeks, Martha became a ghost. She wore plain clothes, dark jeans, gray sweaters, a faded rain jacket. She let her hair go unwashed, tied back in a simple bun. No makeup, no jewelry, nothing that would draw attention. Every morning, she walked along the lake path, past joggers, past dog walkers, past the glass house where Clara stood on the balcony, coffee in hand, talking on the phone. Clara never saw her. Martha learned routines. Daniel left for work at 7:45 a.m. every weekday. Clara went to yoga at 9:30 a.m. on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. The housekeeper came on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Grocery delivery arrived Saturday mornings. Martha bought a notebook, small, spiral-bound, and wrote everything down. Not out of anger, not out of pain, out of precision. On the 4th week, she saw something that made her stop walking. A black Mercedes pulled up to the glass house. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, mid-50s, silver hair, confident stride. She recognized him. Thomas Garrett, senior loan officer at First National Bank, the same bank that had financed the lake house. The same man who had shaken Daniel's hand at the notary's office. Clara opened the door, smiled, kissed him on both cheeks. Too long, too familiar, and they disappeared inside. Martha stood behind a tree, watching. An hour later, Thomas Garrett left. Clara stood at the door, waving, her smile bright and sharp as glass. Martha took out her notebook. Week 4, Thursday, 11:15 a.m. Thomas Garrett. Duration, 58 minutes. She closed the notebook and walked back to her rented room. Martha adjusted her scarf and pretended to read the bus schedule, though the afternoon wind was too warm for wool. Across the street, Clara emerged from the glass doors of the First National Bank, her phone pressed to her ear, a practiced smile on her face. Martha had followed her for 3 days without incident, always from a safe distance. But today, Clara stopped suddenly on the sidewalk and turned around. Their eyes almost met. Martha's pulse jumped. She ducked behind the green mailbox, flipping open the paperback she'd stuffed into her purse that morning. Her fingers trembled so much she could barely focus on the words. Clara scanned the street for several long seconds, suspicion knitting her brow. Then she shook her head, slipped her sunglasses on, and walked toward the parking lot. Martha exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It was a mistake. It too close, too obvious. If she was going to bring Clara down, there couldn't be any more mistakes. Lesson learned, she told herself. I can't let anger outrun patience. The Lakewood Public Library was old, warm, and quiet. Martha applied for a volunteer position under the name Margaret Hall, close enough to her real name that she wouldn't forget it, different enough that no one would recognize her. The head librarian, a young woman named Sophie, with bright red glasses and an enthusiasm for organization, hired her immediately. We need someone who understands the Dewey Decimal System, Sophie said, and someone who doesn't mind working with old records. I don't mind, Martha said. Perfect. You start Monday. Martha worked 3 days a week. Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, in the basement archive. Boxes of old property records, tax documents, marriage licenses, business registrations dating back to the 1,950 seconds, and something else: digital access to county records. On her third day, Martha logged into the system using Sophie's guest account. She searched for property transfers in the last 6 months. The lake house appeared. The screen showed the lake house records. Martha leaned closer, reading each line carefully. The house had been transferred from her name to Daniel and Clara's on April 15th. Purchase price: $1.2 million. The loan came from First National Bank. The officer who approved it: Thomas Garrett. Martha scrolled down to the signature section. There it was. Her name, written in familiar slanted script. But something was wrong. She zoomed in on the image. The signature looked flat. No pen pressure. No depth. She could see tiny square patterns around the letters. The pixels, like a photograph that had been blown up too large. The edges were slightly blurred, not crisp like ink on paper. Someone had scanned an old signature from another document and pasted it here. Not written by hand. Copied. Forged. Martha printed the page, folded it carefully, and slipped it into her bag. Then she typed Clara's full name into the search box. The results appeared. Clara Diane Morrison, that was her maiden name, used to live in a small apartment on Park Avenue. She listed herself as a self-employed consultant. But there was more. Martha clicked on the financial history. In 2019, Clara had declared bankruptcy. She owed money to multiple creditors, bills she never paid, debts she'd walked away from. Clara, who now wore $1,000 shoes and carried designer handbags, had been broke just 5 years ago. Martha searched for business records. 3 company names appeared under Clara's ownership. Morrison Consulting closed in 2020. Clara Co. Investments closed in 2021. And one more. Lakeshore Properties. Status: active. Registered in 2024. Martha clicked on it. Owner: Clara Diane Hale. Business address: 1847 Lakeshore Drive, the Lake House. Type: real estate investment and property management. The company had been registered just 3 months after Martha signed those papers at the notary's office. Clara wasn't just taking the house. She was using it to build a business empire. Clara wasn't just stealing the house. She was building an empire on it. Martha logged out, erased the browser history, and walked out of the library into the cold afternoon air. She stood on the sidewalk, looking at the lake in the distance, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled. That evening, Martha called Harriet from a payphone outside a gas station. "It's me." Harriet's voice cracked. "Martha? My God, where are you? Daniel called me 6 times, asking if I'd heard from you." "Don't tell him." Silence. "Harriet, don't tell him." "Martha, what's going on?" "My signature on the transfer deed. It was forged." Harriet exhaled slowly. "I know." Martha's grip tightened on the receiver. "You knew?" "Not at the time, but after you left, I looked at the documents again. I couldn't sleep. Something felt wrong. So I examined them under magnification. And? Your signature was digitally cloned. Someone scanned an old signature, probably from another document, and pasted it onto the transfer deed." "Who?" "I don't know. But it wasn't me, Martha. I swear to God, the papers I notarized had what looked like your real signature. If it was forged, it happened before they came to my office." Martha closed her eyes, leaning against the cold metal of the phone booth. "Can you prove it?" "Yes. I kept copies. And I have the original notarization certificate with timestamps. If you want to challenge this, I'll testify." "Not yet." "Martha." "Not yet, Harriet. I need you to do something else for me." Harriet hesitated. What? I need you to access the bank records for First National. Specifically, loan officer Thomas Garrett. That's, Martha, that's borderline illegal. I know. If I get caught. You won't. Long silence. Then Harriet's voice, quiet and steady. What are you planning? Martha looked across the street at the glass house, glowing in the darkness. Justice. Martha, will you help me? Another pause. Yes. Thank you. Martha hung up without saying goodbye. 2 weeks later, Martha stood outside First National Bank at 5:45 p.m., waiting. She wore a tailored gray dress, low heels, her hair neatly styled. She looked like a retired professional. Respectable, invisible, forgettable. At 5:52 p.m., Thomas Garrett walked out, briefcase in hand, phone pressed to his ear. Martha followed him. He walked 3 blocks to a wine bar called The Cellar. Upscale, dim lighting, jazz music drifting through open windows. Martha waited 5 minutes, then entered. Garrett sat at the bar, drinking scotch, scrolling through his phone. Martha sat 2 seats away, ordered a glass of red wine, and waited. After 10 minutes, Garrett's phone rang. He answered, irritated. Yes, no, I told you, the paperwork is clean, because I checked it myself. Clara, calm down. Martha's hand tightened on her wine glass. No, there's no trail. The signature was verified. I don't care what he thinks. He signed off on it. Yes, your name is on the LLC. That's what you wanted, isn't it? Fine, I'll call you tomorrow. He hung up, drained his scotch, signaled for another. Martha stood up, moved to the seat beside him. Bad day? Garrett looked at her. Ely looked for the first time. You could say that. Martha smiled. Business or personal? Both. I'm sorry to hear that. She extended her hand. Margaret Hall. He shook it. Thomas Garrett. What do you do, Thomas? Banking. Loans, mostly. He took a sip. You? I used to work in finance. Retired now. But I still find it fascinating how money moves, who controls it, who thinks they control it. Garrett laughed. That's a cynical way to look at it. Is it? I've found that most people who handle large sums of money tend to forget one thing. What's that? Martha leaned in slightly, her voice soft, intimate. Signatures can be traced, timestamps can be verified, and digital records never really disappear. Garrett's smile faded. Martha stood up, placed a $20 bill on the bar. Enjoy your evening, Mr. Garrett. She walked toward the door. Wait. She turned. Garrett stood, his face pale. Who are you? Martha smiled, a cold, precise smile. Someone who understands the Dewey Decimal System. She walked out into the night. Behind her, she heard the sound of a glass shattering on the floor. The next morning, Martha received a text from Harriet. Check your email now. Martha went to the library, logged into a secure account she'd created, and opened the attachment. The attachment contained bank records, loan documents, and email messages, all between Thomas Garrett and Clara Hale. Martha opened the first email. It was dated April 10th, 5 days before the house transfer was finalized. From Thomas Garrett's bank email to Clara. The message was short. Signature verification complete. Notary accepted documents without question. Proceed as planned. Martha's hand trembled slightly as she scrolled to the next message. This one was from Clara to Thomas, sent the same day. Perfect. Daniel won't suspect anything. Once the old woman is out, we finalize the LLC transfer, 40-60 split as discussed. Martha read the words again. Once the old woman is out. They had planned this. Before Martha even signed those papers, before she stood in that cold rain outside the locked door, they had plotted to remove her, to erase her, to take everything. And they were going to split the profits. 40% for Thomas, 60% for Clara. Martha read it 3 times. Then she printed it, folded it, placed it in an envelope, and mailed it to herself at the rented room. That night, Martha sat in her rented room, a laptop open in front of her, a used model she'd bought for cash at a pawn shop. She opened the camera, pressed record. My name is Martha Elizabeth Hale. I am 62 years old. 6 months ago, I sold my home to help my son buy a house by the lake. I signed documents that I believed were legal and honest. She paused, her face calm, expressionless. I was wrong. She held up the forged signature document. This is my signature, except it isn't. It was digitally cloned and placed on a transfer deed without my knowledge or consent. She held up the email printout. This is correspondence between my daughter-in-law, Clara Hale, and Thomas Garrett, senior loan officer at First National Bank. It proves conspiracy to commit fraud. She set the papers down, looked directly into the camera. I am recording this as evidence. Not for revenge, not for anger, but for truth. She leaned forward slightly. To my son, Daniel, I loved you enough to give you everything. I hope one day you'll understand what that cost me. She paused. To Clara, you thought I was weak. You thought silence meant submission. Her eyes cold, sharp, unblinking. You were wrong. She reached forward and stopped the recording. Then she saved it to 3 separate USB drives, mailed one to Harriet, hid one in the library archive, and kept one in her coat pocket. And for the first time in 6 months, Martha Hale slept soundly. Revenge is not always loud. Sometimes it's a spreadsheet, a timestamp, a signature analyzed under magnification. Sometimes revenge is just the truth, waiting patiently to be told. Martha sat in the library basement, surrounded by boxes of old documents, a legal pad in front of her covered in neat handwriting. Martha filled out a request slip at the city records desk, carefully listing the parcel number of her former home. Under state law, property deeds and lien notices were public records. No password or guest account required. The clerk returned 10 minutes later with a stack of microfilm boxes and a metal viewer. For 3 hours, she sifted through decades of transactions, zoning applications, and title transfers. One by one, patterns began to emerge. Shell companies, forged notaries, signatures that bore just enough resemblance to her own to pass casual inspection. When she found Clara's handwriting on a corporate registration form dated 2 weeks before the forged deed, Martha smiled grimly. The paper trail wasn't just a clue. It was ammunition. She had learned long ago that revenge built on emotion crumbles, but revenge built on structure, documentation, verification, irrefutable evidence stands forever. At the top of the page, she wrote 3 names: Clara Hale, Thomas Garrett, Daniel Hale. Beside each name, she drew connecting lines, like a family tree in reverse. Each line represented a transaction, a document, a lie that could be proven. Clara was the architect, Thomas was the accomplice, Daniel was. Martha's pen paused over her son's name. What was Daniel? Complicit or blind? She drew a question mark beside his name. Then she wrote a 4th name at the bottom of the page: Martha Elizabeth Hale. Beside it, she wrote original owner, trust beneficiary, silent partner. That was the truth no one knew. 43 years ago, when Martha's husband Richard was building his construction business, the banks wouldn't lend to him. Too risky, they said. No collateral. So Martha had used her inheritance, money from her grandmother's estate, to finance the first 3 projects. Her name never appeared on the business documents. Richard wanted to protect her, he said. Keep her separate from the risk. But the money was always hers. And when Richard died 15 years ago, the business was sold. The proceeds, $4.7 million, were placed in a trust with Martha as the sole beneficiary. A trust Daniel knew nothing about. Martha had never needed the money. She lived simply, invested carefully, and let the trust grow. By now, it was worth nearly $8 million. She had planned to tell Daniel eventually, leave it to him in her will. But now it would become her weapon. The law office of Evelyn Cross was small, tucked above a bakery on Maple Street. The smell of fresh bread drifted up through the floorboards. Evelyn was 68, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, with a reputation for taking cases no one else would touch. Martha sat across from her, hands folded in her lap. "Tell me everything," Evelyn said. Martha did. She spoke for 40 minutes without interruption. When she finished, she placed 3 folders on the desk. One contained the forged signature documents. One contained Clara's financial history and shell company records. One contained the email correspondence between Clara and Thomas Garrett. Evelyn opened each folder, read carefully, made notes. Finally, she looked up. "This is fraud and forgery," Evelyn said. "You could have them arrested today." "Not yet," Martha replied. "I want them overconfident, expanding, careless. Then I'll lock the cage." "Risky," Evelyn warned. "They won't see it coming. They think I'm weak." Evelyn closed the folders, steepled her fingers. "I'll take your case, but I need access to your financial records, all of them. If we're building a legal strategy, I need to know exactly what resources you have." Martha reached into her bag and pulled out a thick envelope. "Trust documents, investment portfolios, property deeds from before my marriage, everything." Evelyn opened the envelope, scanned the first page, and her eyebrows rose. "You're worth $8.3 million, give or take." Evelyn looked at Martha with new eyes. "Does your son know?" "No." "Does anyone?" "Only my late husband, and now you." Evelyn set the documents down carefully. "Mrs. Hale, with this kind of asset base, you could have fought back immediately. You could have hired a team of lawyers, frozen the property, filed criminal charges." "I know." "Why didn't you?" Martha stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the street below. "Because I wanted to see who my son would become when he thought I had nothing." Her voice was quiet, but it cut like a blade. "Now I know." Over the next 6 weeks, Martha and Evelyn built what Evelyn called the architecture of accountability. Over the next 6 weeks, Martha and Evelyn laid the groundwork. They shielded her assets inside a new trust, filed a formal dispute over the property transfer, and brought in forensic experts to confirm the forgery. A private investigator followed Clara's every move. While Martha waited, Clara and Thomas moved forward with their plan. From her rented room, Martha watched as contractors arrived at the glass house. They built an addition, a new wing extending toward the lake, doubling the size of the property. Clara filed permits under Lakeshore Properties, LLC. The construction loan, $2 million, approved by Thomas Garrett. Martha made copies of every permit, every loan document, every inspection report filed with the county. Then, in early September, Clara threw a party. Not a small gathering, a gala. White tents on the lawn, valet parking, a string quartet, 200 guests. Investors, real estate developers, local politicians. Martha stood in the trees at the edge of the property, invisible in the darkness, and watched. Clara gave a speech from the balcony, champagne glass raised, smiling, radiant. "This house represents more than just property," she said. "It represents vision, growth, the future." Applause. Martha took out her phone and recorded the whole thing. 1 week later, Marcus called. "I got in." Martha met him at a coffee shop 3 towns away. He handed her a USB drive. Everything they were hiding: financial records, forged documents, correspondence with shell companies in 3 states. "They're not just running a scam on you. They're running a real estate fraud operation. Using your house as the anchor property, they've been flipping deeds, forging signatures, inflating appraisals." Martha plugged the drive into her laptop. Dozens of files, hundreds of transactions. She clicked through them slowly, methodically. Then she stopped. One file was labeled D. Hale, Insurance Policy. She opened it. It was a life insurance policy on Daniel, $2 million. Beneficiary, Clara Hale. Taken out 3 months ago. Martha stared at the screen. "Mrs. Hale?" Marcus said. "You okay?" She closed the laptop. "How far are they willing to go?" "Based on what I've seen, all the way." Martha stood up. "Then so am I." That night, Martha walked to the glass house. She didn't knock. She stood outside, looking through the wall of windows, watching Clara and Daniel eat dinner in silence. Daniel looked tired, thin. His suit hung loose on his frame. Clara scrolled through her phone, barely looking up. Martha could have walked in, could have confronted them, could have thrown the evidence in their faces. But she didn't. Because the best revenge isn't confrontation. It's obsolescence. She turned and walked back to her rented room. Daniel parked 2 blocks away from Evelyn Cho's office and sat in the car for 10 full minutes, debating whether to go inside. His palms were damp against the steering wheel. He told himself for months that he was innocent, that whatever Clara and Thomas were doing had nothing to do with him. But after overhearing Clara's late-night call about clearing old liabilities and finalizing the transfer before she moves back, Daniel knew he could no longer pretend. Inside, Harriet met him at the reception desk, surprised but not unfriendly. "I need to speak with Miss Cho," Daniel said quietly. "Off the record." 15 minutes later, in Evelyn's office, he slid a piece of paper across the table. A printed email chain from Clara's personal account. The messages included drafts of forged documents, payment instructions, and an alarming line about the policy payout if necessary. "Do you understand what this is?" Evelyn asked. Daniel nodded. "It's enough to ruin them, and probably me." "Why give it to me?" "Because," he swallowed hard, "because she's still my mother, and she deserves the truth, even if it comes from me." The next morning, Martha wrote a letter. Not to Clara, not to Daniel, to Thomas Garrett. It was simple, typed on plain paper, unsigned. "I know about the storage unit. I know about the shell companies. I know about the insurance policy. You have 72 hours to transfer the lake house back to its rightful owner, or everything I know becomes public." She mailed it from a post office 2 counties away. Then she waited. Thomas Garrett received the letter on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, he had called Clara 6 times. By Tuesday evening, they were in the storage unit, pulling files, shredding documents. Marcus watched from across the street, camera in hand. "They're panicking," he told Martha over the phone. "Good. What's next?" Martha looked out at the lake, watching the sun set over the glass house. "Now we let them make a mistake. The difference between revenge and justice is patience. Revenge strikes hot and fast. Justice builds slowly, brick by brick, until the structure is so solid that nothing can tear it down." Martha wasn't building revenge. She was building a cathedral of consequences. 3 weeks later, Clara threw another party. This one was even bigger. A celebration, she called it. Lakeshore Properties LLC had just secured a $5 million investment from a consortium of out-of-state developers. The invitation, printed on cream cardstock with gold lettering, was posted on social media. Martha saw it from the library computer. Join us for an evening of elegance and vision at the lake house. Cocktails at 7. Dinner at 8. Celebration to follow. Martha printed the invitation and showed it to Evelyn. They're confident, Evelyn said. Arrogant, Martha corrected. That works in our favor. How long until we're ready? Evelyn opened a file, 3 inches thick, dot depositions, forensic reports, financial analyses, witness statements. The civil case is airtight. The criminal referral to the DA is ready. We just need the trigger moment. Martha looked at the invitation again. This is it. You're going to the party? No, Martha smiled. That cold, thin smile Evelyn had come to recognize. I'm going to send them a gift. On the morning of the party, a package arrived at the glass house. The delivery driver handed it to Clara personally. No return address, plain brown paper, her name written in block letters. Clara opened it in the kitchen. Inside, a USB drive and a single sheet of paper. The paper had one sentence. Play this at 8 p.m. tonight. Or I will. Clara's hands shook as she plugged the drive into her laptop. A video file. She clicked play. Martha's face filled the screen. Clara watched for 30 seconds, then slammed the laptop shut. She grabbed her phone, called Thomas. We have a problem. At 2 in the afternoon, Thomas Garrett arrived at the glass house. Clara paced the living room, laptop open on the coffee table. Watch it, she said. Thomas sat down and pressed play. Martha's voice was calm, measured, devastating. My name is Martha Hale. This house was mine. I never signed it away. The signature you see was fabricated, a lie, crafted by Clara Hale and Thomas Garrett. These emails prove they planned it. This is my testimony, witnessed and submitted. And to those watching, you are investing in a crime. The video ended. Thomas sat back, his face gray. When did she record this? I don't know. Where is she? I don't know. Clara threw her phone across the room. It shattered against the wall. She's bluffing. She has to be bluffing. She doesn't have the resources to. She has everything. Thomas stood up, ran his hands through his hair. The emails, the documents, probably the storage unit records too. She's been building a case for months. So, what do we do? Cancel the party, destroy the remaining files, transfer what money we can offshore, and disappear. I'm not running. Thomas grabbed her by the shoulders. Clara, listen to me. If that video plays tonight in front of 200 people, investors, press, politicians, we're finished. Not just finished. We're going to prison. Clara pulled away, thinking, what if we stop her before she can release it? How? Clara looked out at the lake. She's close. She has to be. She's been watching us. You think she's here? In Lakewood? I know she is. That afternoon, Clara and Thomas drove through town, looking for Martha. They checked hotels, motels, bed and breakfasts. No one had seen an elderly woman matching Martha's description. At 4 o'clock, Clara parked outside the library. Why here? Thomas asked. Because it's quiet, anonymous, somewhere she could hide in plain sight. They walked inside. Sophie the librarian looked up from the front desk, smiling. Can I help you? Clara showed her a photo of Martha on her phone. Have you seen this woman? Sophie squinted at the screen. I don't think so. Why? She's my mother-in-law. She's not well. We're trying to find her. Sophie's expression softened. Oh, I'm so sorry. Let me check with our volunteers. She walked to the back office. Clara and Thomas waited. Through the window, Clara could see the lake in the distance. Boats drifting, birds circling. Sophie returned, shaking her head. Sorry, no one's seen her. As they turned to leave, Clara glanced at the volunteer schedule posted on the bulletin board. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Margaret Hall, archive assistant. Margaret Hall. Something about that name tugged at the edge of Clara's memory. She took a photo of the schedule with her phone. Outside, she showed it to Thomas. Margaret Hall, M.H. Martha Hale. Thomas stared at the photo. She's been here the whole time. Not just here, working here, with access to county records, property files, everything she needed. Clara smiled slowly. Then we wait for her to come back. At 6:30, as the sun began to set, Martha walked toward the library. She wore her usual gray sweater, faded jeans, hair tied back, invisible, forgettable. She was halfway down the block when she saw the black Mercedes parked outside the library. Thomas's car. Martha stopped. Across the street, she could see Clara sitting in the passenger seat, watching the library entrance. They were waiting for her. Martha turned calmly and walked in the opposite direction. She didn't run, didn't look back. She walked 3 blocks to a payphone outside a convenience store and called Evelyn. They know. Are you safe? For now, but they'll keep looking. Where are you? It doesn't matter. Is the DA ready? He's reviewing the case file now. But, Martha, if they find you before we can file. They won't. How can you be sure? Martha looked toward the lake, where the glass house glowed in the distance, white tents erected on the lawn, lights strung through the trees. Because in 2 hours, they'll be too busy to look for me. At 7 o'clock, guests began arriving at the glass house. Expensive cars lined the driveway, men in suits, women in cocktail dresses, laughter, champagne, the sound of the string quartet drifting across the water. Daniel stood near the entrance, greeting guests, smiling mechanically. He looked exhausted. Clara moved through the crowd in a red dress, diamond earrings catching the light, playing the role of successful entrepreneur. Thomas stayed close to her, scanning faces, waiting for Martha to appear. She didn't. By 8 o'clock, 200 people filled the lawn. Clara stepped onto the balcony, microphone in hand. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Applause. This house represents more than real estate. It represents vision, ambition, the courage to build something lasting. More applause. Tonight, we celebrate not just what we've built, but what we'll build together. She raised her champagne glass. Behind her, inside the house, the large screen TV flickered on. Clara didn't notice at first. Then someone in the crowd pointed. Clara turned. Martha's face filled the screen. The recording, Clara's champagne glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the stone balcony. The crowd fell silent. Martha's voice, calm and clear, carried across the lawn. My name is Martha Elizabeth Hale. For 3 minutes and 47 seconds, 200 people watched Martha's testimony. No one moved. No one spoke. When the video ended, silence hung in the air like smoke. Then, all at once, the crowd erupted. Investors pulled out phones, calling lawyers. A journalist in the back began recording on his camera. Someone shouted, "Is this true?" Clara stood frozen on the balcony. Thomas pushed through the crowd toward the door, but 2 men in dark suits stepped into his path. Thomas Garrett? Who are you? FBI, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit bank fraud." The agents turned to Clara. "Clara Hale, you're also under arrest." Clara looked at Daniel, her face pale, desperate. "Daniel, tell them this is a mistake." Daniel stood at the edge of the crowd, watching his wife being handcuffed. He said nothing. 2 hours later, the glass house was empty except for Daniel. He sat alone in the living room. The party debris scattered around him, .br oaken glasses, abandoned plates, the screen still frozen on Martha's face. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. "Hello?" "Daniel." His mother's voice. He closed his eyes. "Mom, are you alone?" "Yes." Silence. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." "Find out what? That my wife is a criminal? That you've been hiding for 6 months? That none of this was real?" "It was real, Daniel. Your father and I built our life together. We built this security for you. I wanted you to have everything." "Everything?" His voice cracked. "I have nothing, Mom. My wife is going to prison. This house will be seized. My name is attached to fraud charges." "No." "What?" "Your name is clear. Evelyn made sure of it. The forensic analysts proved you weren't part of the conspiracy. You were a victim too." Daniel pressed his hand to his forehead. "I was blind," Daniel whispered. "Love does that," Martha said. "But blindness isn't forever." "I know." "Can I see you?" "Soon." "When?" "When you're ready." The line went dead. Daniel sat in the empty house and cried. The story broke the next morning. Lake House fraud scheme exposed. Elderly woman outsmarts con artist. The press loved it. The underdog story. The elderly mother who fought back with intelligence instead of violence. Martha's face appeared on local news, then regional news, then national. Reporters camped outside the glass house. Clara and Thomas were denied bail. The evidence, emails, forged documents, financial records, was overwhelming. The DA filed 17 counts of fraud, conspiracy, forgery, and elder abuse. 3 other victims came forward, elderly property owners who had been targeted by Clara's previous schemes. The case became a landmark prosecution. And Martha disappeared. Winter came to Lakewood. The glass house stood empty, seized by federal authorities, surrounded by yellow police tape. Daniel had moved into a small apartment downtown. He worked as a project manager for a local construction company. Honest work, modest pay. Every Friday, he visited a therapist. He was learning to rebuild. Clara's trial was set for March. Thomas had already pleaded guilty in exchange for testimony against her. He was facing 15 years. Clara was facing 30. And Martha? No one knew where Martha was. She had vanished after the party, leaving only a letter for Evelyn Cross with instructions for managing the property and the trust. Daniel had tried to find her. He called Harriet, who claimed she didn't know. He hired a private investigator who found nothing. It was as if she had become a ghost. On a cold morning in February, Daniel found an envelope slipped under his apartment door. No postage, hand-delivered. Inside, a key and a letter. Dear Daniel, by the time you read this, the legal proceedings will be nearly finished. Clara will face justice. Thomas will face consequences. And you will be free. The key enclosed is to a safety deposit box at Lakewood Community Bank, Box 447. Inside, you'll find documents, the full history of your father's business, the trust he and I built, and instructions for accessing the inheritance I've set aside for you. I know you said you didn't want anything from this situation, but this isn't from the house, or from the fraud, or from the pain. This is from your father and me. built over 40 years of hard work, sacrifice, and love. Use it wisely. Build something good. Help people who need helping. I've also included contact information for 3 families whose elderly relatives were scammed by Clara before she met you. They lost everything. Perhaps you could help them rebuild. That would make your father proud. As for me, I'm well. I'm safe. And I'm finally at peace. You asked when you could see me again. The answer is, when you can look in the mirror and see not the son who failed, but the man who learned. I'll be watching for that day. With all my love, Mom. Daniel read the letter 3 times, then sat on his couch and cried until he couldn't cry anymore. Then he put on his coat, took the key, and drove to the bank. Inside box 447, Daniel found trust documents showing assets worth $8.3 million, with him as the sole beneficiary upon Martha's instruction. A handwritten letter from his father, dated 1 week before he died, explaining the business, the sacrifices, and his hopes for Daniel's future. Photographs. Daniel as a baby, as a child, graduating high school, getting married, and one more item, a deed. Not to the glass house. To a small cottage by the lake, 3 miles north, purchased 30 years ago under Martha's maiden name. The deed had Daniel's name on it now, transferred just last week. At the bottom, a note in Martha's handwriting. Build something here. Something honest. Something yours. Daniel drove to the address on the deed. The cottage was small, 2 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, weathered shingles, surrounded by pine trees. The lake lapped gently at a small dock. It was nothing like the glass house. It was perfect. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The furniture was simple. A kitchen table, 2 chairs, a couch facing the fireplace. On the table, another envelope. Inside, architectural plans. Plans for expanding the cottage, adding rooms, creating space for something. At the bottom, Martha had written, "Your father always wanted to build a community center, a place where people could learn trades, start over, rebuild their lives. Maybe you could finish what he started." Daniel spread the plans across the table, studying them. For the first time in months, he smiled. Clara's trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: forged documents, financial records, victim testimony, email correspondence. Clara's defense argued she had been manipulated, that Thomas Garrett was the mastermind. No one believed her. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing: 28 years in federal prison. As the verdict was read, Clara looked toward the gallery, searching for Daniel. He wasn't there. Daniel had been working on the cottage for 3 months. He'd hired a small crew, started the renovations. The community center was taking shape. One afternoon, as he was hammering boards into place, he heard a car pull up. He turned. A woman stepped out, in mid-60s, silver hair cut short, wearing jeans and a simple blue sweater. It took him a moment to recognize her. "Mom?" Martha walked toward him slowly, taking in the construction, the plans tacked to the wall, the sign he'd made. Hale Community Center, opening fall, 2025. "You're building it," she said. "Yeah," Daniel set down his hammer. I thought it's what Dad would have wanted." "It is." They stood facing each other, 3 feet apart, the lake breeze moving between them. "I'm sorry," Daniel said, "for everything, for not seeing, for not protecting you, for—" "Daniel." He stopped. Martha stepped forward and took his hands in hers. "You were raised to trust, to love, to believe in people. Those aren't weaknesses. They're the best parts of you. But I failed. No, you survived, and now you're rebuilding. That's not failure. That's courage. Daniel pulled her into a hug, and for the first time in a year, Martha let herself cry. Over the next 6 months, Daniel and Martha worked together to finish the community center. It opened on a Saturday in October, a beautiful autumn day, leaves golden and red, the lake reflecting the blue sky. 50 people attended the opening, former construction workers learning new trades, single mothers taking business classes, elderly residents attending financial literacy workshops. The first person to sign up for classes was Mrs. Chen, Martha's former landlady. "I always wanted to learn bookkeeping," she said, grinning. Martha taught the class herself. 1 year after the party, the federal government released the glass house from seizure. Daniel could have reclaimed it. The deed was in his name, free and clear. Instead, he donated it. The building became a women's shelter, a place for victims of domestic abuse and financial exploitation to rebuild their lives. The first resident was a woman named Alice, 68, who had lost her home to a scam similar to Clara's scheme. Martha helped her move in personally, carrying boxes, making tea, sitting with her as she cried. "You'll get through this," Martha said. "How do you know?" "Because I did." Alice looked at her. "You're the woman from the news. The one who—" "Yes." "How did you do it? How did you stay strong?" Martha looked out at the lake, where the sun was setting, painting the water gold. "I remembered that silence isn't weakness. Patience isn't surrender. And sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to disappear." 2 years after the trial, Martha stood on the dock of the cottage, watching the sun rise over the lake. The community center behind her was thriving. Daniel had become the director. He'd remarried. A kind woman named Sarah who taught woodworking classes. The glass house across the lake had been transformed into a beacon of hope for dozens of women who had lost everything and were learning to rebuild. Clara was serving her sentence. She'd written Daniel several letters. He'd returned them all unopened. Thomas Garrett had been released after 12 years for good behavior. He now volunteered at the community center, teaching financial literacy and warning others about the dangers of fraud. Redemption, Martha had learned, came in many forms. As the sun climbed higher, Martha heard footsteps behind her. Daniel joined her on the dock, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Morning, Mom." "Morning." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the boats drift across the lake. "Do you ever regret it?" Daniel asked. "Not pressing charges right away? Not just ending it quickly?" Martha considered the question. "No, because quick endings don't teach lessons. They don't create change. They don't heal." "And you're healed?" Martha smiled. "I'm at peace. That's better than healed." Daniel put his arm around her shoulders. "I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you." They watched the sun climb higher, the lake shimmering, the house by the water standing strong against the morning light. And Martha Hale, 64 years old, survivor, strategist, mother, finally allowed herself to rest,